While we were on the subject of illustrations, I was fascinated by what you wrote about images of Jane herself and how, from very flimsy starting materials, images of her had been produced, which again reinterpret her, create a Jane of the imagination. I suppose the first thing I wanted to ask you about the illustrations is, why do you think there are so few contemporary illustrations when she lived in a culture where the making of portraits, the accomplishment with the pen and the pencil were so much part of everyday life?
I think it's absolutely bizarre because, as you say, every young lady was taught to be accomplished, and they all did drawing lessons, and all the Austens were pretty good draftsmen and women. Cassandra was meant to be the arty one, but I'm sure Jane did as many, sketches as most young women, and Henry was a drawing master at one point, and James Austen, Jane's eldest brother, was an amateur artist at university. So it is extraordinary that so few of their works survive. And Cassandra's works puzzle me profoundly because there's a landscape painting by her at Chawton Cottage. There's a very pretty little watercolour painting, supposedly of her niece Fanny, but it's not signed, but people think it's by Cassandra. And Fanny herself is in that picture doing a painting of another female figure. I'd like to think it was her Aunt Jane in the off camera, as it were. But, this was such a common occupation for a young woman that it's bizarre that all we've got of Jane Austen by Cassandra are two pictures. One is called The Horrid Scratch by one of the nieces of her that's in the National Portrait Gallery, and from which all the familiar Austen seated portraits with a mob cap thing on are based. And the other one is a very unhelpful but telling picture of Austen seen, not seen at all. I mean, it's from the back view, so you see the back of a woman with a strangely articulated leg and a bonnet, and that is supposedly Jane Austen in 1804, but of course we don't see the face at all. So whether Cassandra destroyed a lot of her own pictures of Jane because she thought they weren't good enough, but then the one that's left is so inadequate that makes it rather unlikely. But the one that's left, apart from being tiny and faint, does have, I think, a terribly characteristic body language. I mean, the face is a bit strange, I think we have to say. She's not looking at her best. But the tetchy arm folding, I mean, it's just it, and the position of the shoulders, it's so fed up. And you do get a sense of Austen listening to some total bore and not saying anything, and Cassandra just getting the pencil and very quickly doing a sketch of a characteristically surly attitude of her sisters. And it's very interesting that is the only one we have to go on, and that's the one that's had to be manipulated by imagination and pen into something that's more acceptable and pretty and sometimes ridiculous. I mean, some of those variations on a theme are so doe-eyed, so bovine, so disgusting that, you just wonder how anybody could produce a picture of Jane Austen that had so little connection with the voice in the texts.
No, we spoke about the 1870s following the Austen Leigh memoir as a sort of first great explosion of public interest, and I guess the second great wave came 120 years later in the 1990s, and that was led not by a memoir but by television and film.
Yes, completely. That was astonishing. I think the people who made the Pride and Prejudice series for BBC in 1995 couldn't have imagined how much of an effect that would have had. I mean, not just in terms of commercially, I mean, with the sales of the video and the success of the film globally, but the way that it sort of released some pent-up desire to find a globally adorable genius who could be, used either purely for entertainment purposes, but with a moral edge to it. I mean, Austen's form of entertainment is not bland or vacant. It's always got, even at its most simple, some sort of profoundly interesting moral foundations. But of course, you can allow people to just wallow in production values and the beauty of the films that they were making, and to also allow all the people who treasured Austen's texts to have a day off. So it allows you to be both high-minded and highbrow and also to slouch around on a sofa with a bag of crisps or a box of chocolates. I mean, it draws together so many pleasure and leisure threads that, and also with the advent of videotape, I mean, that there is always a technological undercurrent, isn't there? I mean, with the memoir, you could say it was to do with publication, printing being cheaper, publication history being different. With the illustrated editions, again, I mean, printing pictures became easier and cheaper, and with cine film and cinema film, the first 1940s films, dealt with Austen texts as well. I mean, the Pride and Prejudice of 1940, but certainly when television was able to be sold as video, and Austen's adorable 6-part adaptation came along. I mean, it was just asking to be everybody's Christmas present. And once you've done that, once you've really broken the bounds of ordinary reading and ordinary reading habits and gone outside the book and outside the text to that extent, through a film that people will then see and think they've read the book, even if they haven't read the book. They've heard about the book. They know it's about Regency-ish things. It's a love story. They know it's venerated by people, and that it's worth clocking and it's worth kind of acquiring culturally. Then having seen the film will do, or even having heard about the film will do. Austen then becomes, to some extent, one of your possessions. And this has happened now for so many millions of people that, of course, then you can start referring to that recognisability in other ways. So, I mean, then a woman in a bonnet selling a, cup of cocoa would connect with the Austen phenomenon. So it becomes massively valuable and really almost impossible to put an end to. In this, as I've written about, in a sort of viral way. I mean, it does have an exponential effect. I mean, it just goes on and on.
Claire Harman. Jane's Fame, How Jane Austen Conquered the World, is out now in paperback. You can find full details about this book, as well as several million more, by going to blackwell.co.uk. That's all for this Blackwell Online podcast, so thank you for listening, and until next time, goodbye.